Hello, today I'm going to be doing a presentation on an environmental performance analysis on one of the most well-known countries in West Africa, Ghana. So this presentation is going to analyze this country's environmental performance from a governance perspective with an emphasis on compliance with international environmental law. I'll also be looking at some standardized metrics released from some renowned institutions such as Yale University and the World Bank Group. So I'll talk a little bit about Ghana's population and culture. So Ghana is known for its repository of unique cultural heritage and also rich biodiversity and also production of some major mineral resources. It's located in sub-Saharan Africa, which is also a sustainable development goal region, which has been monitored pretty closely in recent years. And according to the World Bank Group, Ghana reported a total population of over 31 million people in 2021, with an annual population growth of 2.1%. Citizens of Ghana are recognized for their colorful West African fabrics, as you can see on the bottom right over here, and their unique diet consisting of hot and spicy foods with ingredients like plantains, cassava, and yams. There are also 52 ethnic groups in the 10 regions that comprise Ghana's culture, and this is a major reason why, if you're ever visiting or as a tourist, there are a variety of traditional festivals and ceremonies that you are welcome to attend. So now I'll discuss a little bit about Ghana's economy. So there are many assessments of Ghana's economic progress as a, quote, developing nation. And many of the sources are expressing the sentiment that it has achieved considerable growth in recent years. In 2019, Ghana was found to have the fastest growing economy in all of Africa, displaying steady growth even in the face of recent adversity such as the COVID-19 pandemic. And good governance practices allowed Ghana to strengthen its economy from a more structured and equitable system of governance, and one that focused on stable democracy and economic reform. And so as a result of this, Ghana was deemed a lower middle income country status in 2011, which is another achievement due to steady GDP growth and improved governance principles. Bloomberg reported a return to economic growth towards the end of 2021, as you can see in this chart, after a drop in performance in 2020 for reasons that affected economies worldwide. Despite the drop, a focus on sustainable development and good policy-making practices allowed the country to recuperate and grow, though there is still room for improvement that I'll discuss later in this presentation. Currently, Ghana's GDP is $77.59 billion, and it's displaying an annual GDP growth of 5.4%. To put into perspective, Ghana's GDP growth was able to recover from a major hit in 2020, going from 0.5% to 5.4% in just a year, after a large drop from 6.5% in 2019. And this is what you'll see in this graph on the right, the big drop in 2020, and then went back to steady growth after that. But with the balance of economic growth, however, there comes a multitude of environmental challenges that must be addressed. So, though Ghana is recognized for its rich natural resources, the depletion of these resources is a major sustainability issue that poses a threat to Ghana's land and its people. According to Yale University's Environmental Performance Index, Ghana ranked rather low at 170 out of 180 countries that were included in that assessment for environmental performance, and their EPI score was 27.70. In the last 10 years, Ghana's EPI score received a negative change due to major environmental issues surrounding ecosystem services, and I'll go a little bit more in depth of the EPI analysis later in this presentation. So some of the biggest environmental issues that the EPI assessment catched was tree cover loss, fisheries, essentially overfishing was an issue, acidification, and one of the biggest issues was reduced air quality. According to the World Bank, Ghana is reporting 0.7 metric tons of carbon dioxide emissions per capita and 35.1% forest area in 2020, compared to nearly 40% in 2000. So you can see that there is a pattern of tree cover loss. Even in the graph on the right, you can see that Ghana is one of the countries that lost the most rainforest. This is in 2018, but the numbers are rising since then. And so because of these issues that Ghana is facing, it is very important for them to participate in multilateral environmental agreements. So on this slide, I'll be discussing this list of multilateral environmental agreements that was released by the American Bar Association. And I'll also be discussing the MEA action status, which I determined using University of Oregon's International Environmental Agreements database, which was released in 2020. And I'll also be discussing some of the reporting obligations that I compiled using a tool called Informia, and this was published by the United Nations to access information about MEAs, including but not limited to national plans, reports, and court decisions. So as of right now, from this list of multilateral environmental agreements, I have found evidence that Ghana has ratified every single agreement on this list, and I have not yet found any evidence that they have backed out or anything like that. So I'll go a little bit into detail on some of the compliance aspects of this and the reporting requirements. So for the Montreal Protocol, there's a requirement to participate in annual meetings. And then for the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, the obligation is to produce a national climate change policy. For the Kyoto Protocol, there's a requirement for a national communication to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, and that's shortened to UNFCCC. And then for the Paris Agreement, compliance included national communication to the UNFCCC, and then also updated nationally determined contributions. Something else Ghana submitted a report for, which is not mandatory, was the Climate Action Plan for the Paris Agreement. And then for the Convention on Biological Diversity, there's a requirement to produce a national biodiversity strategy and action plan. For the Cartagena Protocol on Biosafety, the requirement is an implementation plan, which Ghana last submitted in 2019. For the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species, shortened to CITES, there was a requirement to produce annual reports on each participating country's behalf. For the Convention on Migratory Species, there's a requirement for a national report, and Ghana recently submitted a report specifically for COP13, which is the most recent one I could find. For the Convention to Combat Desertification, there's a requirement for a national action plan to combat desertification. The Ramsar Wetlands Convention requires a national report from participating countries. For the UNESCO World Heritage Convention, there's a requirement for state of conservation reports, and there are currently 7 from Ghana that I've found. For the Law of Sea Convention, there are deposit obligations. An example of this would be the National Integrated Maritime Strategy. For the Straddling Fish Stocks Agreement, participating countries must send catch data on tuna or tuna-like species annually to ICCAT secretaries. For the Basel Convention on Hazardous Waste, there is a requirement to participate in environmental network for optimizing regulatory compliance on illegal traffic meetings, which is shortened to enforce meetings. And there's also a requirement to produce national reports. For the Stockholm Convention on POPs, there's a requirement to submit a situation report. For the Rotterdam Convention on PIC, there's a requirement for the sub-regional consultation of the implementation of the Rotterdam Convention for English-speaking West African countries. And so that's a little bit specific, and that applies to Ghana specifically, because English-speaking West African country. And then lastly, for the Minamata Convention on Mercury, there's a requirement for an assessment report, and I did find evidence that Ghana submitted this. So using the Informia tool, I found that Ghana has a history of relatively timely communication as per compliance requirements from all of these organizations. And there are only a handful of cases I found of non-compliance due to either a missing report or something like that in recent years. The most serious instance of non-compliance that I found using that same Informia tool is that Ghana has not submitted a national report in compliance with the Basel Convention since 2008. So I thought that was kind of a big thing. 2008 was a long time ago, and I have not seen any more recent reports, though I was looking at the database and there are reports from other countries, but not Ghana. However, Ghana did conduct an e-waste country assessment in 2011 for the Basel Convention, which discusses the environmental degradation issues caused by the Agbo Blashi site, which is actually a place that turned into a dumping ground for electronic waste in Ghana. And other than this case, I've not found any more serious violations of the multilateral environmental agreement compliance requirements on Ghana's behalf. So this database also shows that Ghana has exhibited excellent compliance with submitting national reports for a lot of these, and especially what I found very timely communication to the Convention of Migratory Species, the Minamata Convention on Mercury, the Ramsar Convention, and any communication to the UN FCCC I found very timely on Ghana's behalf. So now I'll go into the environmental performance analysis, and the assessment I'm using is the one produced by World Bank Group. It's the CEA, which is a country environmental analysis. So this analysis found that there are two main indicators to assess economic growth, and number one is national wealth, which measures a country's assets in both renewable and non-renewable natural capital. So even though Ghana's national wealth more than doubled in the last 2 decades, growth in this analysis was assessed through sustainable management of natural capital. And in Ghana's case, most of the country's recent wealth growth is attributed to non-renewable assets paired with large losses of renewable resources. And so according to the World Bank assessment, Ghana's high population growth is going to pose a threat to existing capital stocks, which has to be shared with future generations. And so erosion of Ghana's produced capital today exemplifies unsustainable management of natural capital, along with the lack of reinvesting capital into other useful forms. The second indicator is adjusted net savings, or ANS, which describes the country's gross national saving adjusted for gains in education spending and losses through environmental depletion of subsoil and table. So due to national resource depletion and increased air pollution damage, Ghana's ANS has been negative since 2007, and this is an indication that the country is overlooking long-term sustainability and saving less than consuming. And another part of this assessment is to look at the cost of environmental degradation. $6.3 billion have been spent due to air pollution, water pollution, and gold mines. And so some of the main takeaways I took from this assessment was that Ghana needs to, number one, prioritize environmental considerations during development planning. Number two, strengthen institutions for transparency and accountability when it comes to resource management. And number three, they need to enforce and reinforce laws that advance critical policy reform. And so I'm just going to keep continuing with this assessment. Some of the shortfalls that are holding Ghana back from more effective implementation, according to the World Group CEA, is that governance framework surrounding air pollution requires cross-sectoral coordination between ministries, departments, or any other specific agencies, and that is currently lacking. And so to address this, Ghana has produced a national action plan in 2018 to address air quality management, but still there are linkages missing between the necessary parties. And this causes institutional inefficiencies and key policy challenges in Ghana for the undefined relationship between agencies. And so for all these factors, I believe that this is why the Yale Center for Environmental Law and Policy ranked Ghana to be low for their EPI score, and ranking with other countries to be 170 out of 180. So in terms of Ghana's future growth, I overall find that Ghana is involved in enough international environmental initiatives, but just lacks a strong foundations and governance framework to reach full potential in implementing environmental initiatives. So some of the things that I came up with and some things I saw in the assessment was to use incentives to promote sustainable living amongst Ghanaians. This comes maybe with vehicle emissions and things like that, more transparency to citizens of Ghana from their government, and to prioritize both the economy and the environment, not just the economy, to ensure the country's longevity and natural resource preservation. And these are the references I use to do all the research for this presentation. Thank you.